mistaken assumptions that we made at the time were that there would be no more war. The 6th of June, 1944, of D-Day was soon forgotten in the miasma of those mistaken assumptions. And then came something very sudden, the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. A personal aside, I must tell you. President Roosevelt left the White House for his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, at Easter in 1945. I was in Washington as a boy of 9 with my older brother, and my father, who knew someone in the White House, was able to allow my brother and me to be taken into the White House, not only into the White House, but into the Oval Office, and for us to sit in the chair of Franklin Roosevelt just a few days after he had departed for Warm Springs, Georgia, and to turn in his chair and to open a drawer and take a pencil and keep the pencil. It was probably the single experience that began my interest in national affairs and in public policy and in the other areas in which I have specialized for these many years. 6 days later, after I sat in the chair of President Roosevelt, he was dead. And suddenly we had a new leader of the Western world, a forced leader, a former senator from Missouri, a machine politician named Harry S. Truman. The expectations were not high. Truman was an accidental vice president and certainly an accidental president. The demobilization of Western forces from Europe was rapid. We wanted to go home, and we went home. And we took with us everything that we had brought over many years. The British went home, and France and the rest of Europe were left to rebuild themselves. This was a situation that could not long prevail. The Soviet Union was manifesting hostility, arrogance toward us, gradually as it moved into Eastern Europe, not with its forces, but with its political forces backed by the military might of the Soviet Union. So efforts were made to resist. Here in France, great statesmen such as Jean Monnet and others began the concepts of Western European reintegration and rebuilding. You had the European Coal and Steel Community, the ECSC, Western European Union, all as precursors of NATO, which was taken, steps which were taken in 1949 to create an alliance, a North American treaty organization to resist, or to demonstrate at least the will to resist, the Soviet encroachment. Germany was resurrected, Western Germany, as a democratic nation, and the rest of Germany remained divided, of course, under Soviet rule in the formation of the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, or the German Democratic Republic. Slowly, Eastern Europe was taken over. To supply Berlin, which was divided into 4 parts, the Soviet, the French, the British, and the American, we had to fly missions from Frankfurt in quite ancient aircraft, the aircraft that were built in the year of my birth, 1936, the DC-3, or Dakota, as it's favorably known here in Europe. In 1946, Winston Churchill, then removed from office, came to the United States, and he went to a little town in Missouri, the home state of President Truman, to a college at Fulton, Missouri. And there he gave a speech that defined the new world in which we were living, the Fulton speech in March of 1946. At that time, among other things that he said, so many brilliant things during the war and after, Winston Churchill said, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended upon Europe." Hence the phrase, the Iron Curtain, and the division, an iron curtain signifying partition, seemingly forever. NATO did respond, and so did America, with the Marshall Program. In 1947, the Secretary of State, George Marshall, the five-star Army general, a hero of World War II, announced Western European recovery, a huge multi-billion-dollar program to resurrect Europe from the ashes of war, including but not limited to Germany, more slowly than others, but nonetheless done. And as Europe organized slowly, President Truman yielded to President Dwight D. Eisenhower, himself a famous general who led the Operation Overlord on June the 6th, 1944, from Britain into northeastern France. And this then became the job of Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and still no significant change in the division of Europe between that part on the other side of the Iron Curtain and the part on, say, our side. It wasn't that different. There was confusion over the Soviet policy, confusion and disagreement in the West. Peaceful coexistence, la coexistence pacifique, came to have two meanings. One for us, which meant live and let live, and then the meaning that the Soviet Union interpreted to mirnoye sojitestvo, or mirnoye sosuchestvovanie, meaning peaceful coexistence, but active peaceful coexistence. And in the final interpretation came to mean what's yours is yours, what's mine is not yours, it's mine, and yours is mine too. So this became a real major problem for us. And then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962, brought about through the misjudgment of Khrushchev when he met with John F. Kennedy, the young, untested John F. Kennedy in Vienna in 1962, and came to the conclusion that Kennedy was weak and that he would not resist. Therefore, the missiles in Cuba, and we say the closest thing to a real war in the post-war period. Some disagree, but it was a very serious crisis. I remember very well because I watched President Kennedy's speech while I was in the heart of New York City trying to get back to Washington and my family. In the summer of 1963, we had the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and a new outlook on life. There were small changes in Europe and the USSR. Yugoslavia seemed independent of the major communist movement of the Soviet Union. And there were other movements within Eastern Europe. And then came Johnson, as I mentioned, and then President Nixon, whom I served as his principal foreign policy coordinator for his 1968 campaign, and so on and so forth. Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter led ultimately to the election of Ronald Reagan, and the rejection of the idea that peaceful coexistence and détente were adequate policies for the United States. Reagan declared a turn, a major turn, a similar turn that occurred when the Berlin Wall collapsed, the date of which is this is the anniversary, so to speak, of the collapse of the Berlin Wall right now. We began our military buildup. Reagan's first press conference laid down the challenge. He said that the Soviets will lie, cheat, and steal to get whatever they want. And it was thought that Reagan was a cowboy, that Reagan believed only in armaments. But they didn't know that Reagan had a real strategy. Reagan armed in order to be able to disarm. Reagan armed in order to negotiate with the Soviet Union, yes, from a position of strength. The Soviet Union denounced positions of strength. Reagan was shot just a short time after being in office. He tried to communicate with Brezhnev. He wrote Brezhnev from his hospital bed a handwritten letter and asked it be delivered to Brezhnev. It was delivered and rejected. And in that letter, which I happened to see in its draft form when it came from President Reagan, he was asking for the opportunity to meet with Brezhnev and to discuss things, knowing that he, Reagan, had been brought close to death, but it was not to happen, simply rejected. There was a succession of Soviet leaders, as has been expertly mentioned by M. VERNET and others here. You had Brezhnev and then Andropov and Chernenko. And when Reagan was criticized for not meeting with Soviet leaders, he simply said, I am trying to meet with Soviet leaders, but they keep dying on me. So it posed a technical problem, we might say. But the essence of that Reagan strategy was strength. A few concessions, negotiations, yes, but strength. We deploy the missiles. If you don't remove the SS-20s from Ukraine and from Czechoslovakia and from Poland, if you don't remove those missiles beyond the Urals so that they cannot reach Western Europe, we will deploy Pershing and cruise missiles. And he intended to do that, and we did.